The book lay open on her lap, but Reagan Mercer wasn't reading anymore. She sat in seat 28A, pressed against the window of the Boeing 777, watching the endless gray of the Atlantic 38,000 feet below. The cabin lights had dimmed for the overnight crossing, and most passengers around her had surrendered to sleep, their breathing so uneven beneath thin airline blankets.
We have to go now.
Reagan hadn't slept on a plane in 4 years, not since Afghanistan. She was 28 years old, 5'3", with auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and gray-blue eyes that missed nothing. She wore faded jeans, a Texas A&M hoodie 2 sizes too large, and white sneakers that had seen better days. No makeup, no jewelry except for a small silver ring on her right hand, worn smooth by years of wear. To anyone glancing her way, she looked like a graduate student heading home from a semester abroad, young, harmless, forgettable. That was exactly how she wanted it. The book in her lap was Boyd, the Fighter Pilot Who Changed the Art of War. She'd read it 6 times already, but there was comfort in familiar words, in the story of a man who revolutionized aerial combat through sheer force of will and intellect. Her father had given her this copy when she was 13, just months before he deployed for the last time in early 1991. "Read this," he'd said, pressing it into her hands. "Understand it. Boyd knew something most pilots never figure out. The one who wins isn't the one with the better plane, it's the one who thinks faster." 3 months later, Colonel Douglas Mustang Mercer was dead shot down over the burning oil fields of Kuwait during Operation Desert Storm. That was 33 years ago. Reagan had been a child then, too young to fully understand what she'd lost, but she understood now. Every mission she flew, every life she saved, every time she pushed her A-10 through hostile skies, she carried her father with her. Reagan closed her eyes, letting the memory wash over her. Even now, all these years later, she could still smell the ranch in Hill Country, Texas. Cedar and dust and gun oil. Could still feel the weight of the Remington 700 in her small hands, her father's voice. Calm and steady behind her. "1 round, Reagan. 1 target. Don't waste it." She'd been 8 years old, barely tall enough to see over the fence posts. Her grandfather had stood beside them, arms crossed, watching with those sharp gray eyes that she'd inherited. Brigadier General William Mercer, retired, who'd flown B-52s over Soviet airspace during the coldest years of the Cold War. 3 generations of pilots, 3 generations of warriors. And now she was the last one. Reagan opened her eyes and looked around the cabin again. Not because she was nervous, because she was always looking, always watching. 4 years of combat missions had rewired her brain in ways she was still discovering. She noticed exits, counted heads, evaluated threats. It happened automatically now, like breathing. The Lufthansa flight from Ramstein Air Base to Washington Dulles carried 280 passengers across 3 cabins. First class up front, business in the middle economy, stretching back toward the tail where she sat. Standard configuration for a 707-300ER. 6 hours into an 8-hour flight, currently cruising at 38,000 feet airspeed, around 560 miles per hour. Everything perfectly normal. Except it wasn't. Reagan had noticed the blonde flight attendant first, about an hour after takeoff. The woman was pretty, maybe early 30s, with the practiced smile of someone who'd worked the job for years. She moved through the cabin with efficiency, checking overhead bins, collecting trash, murmuring politely to passengers who needed extra pillows. But she was wearing the wrong shoes. Flight attendants wore low heels or comfortable flat shoes designed for walking miles of narrow aisles during long flights. This woman wore boots, black low-cut with rubber soles and reinforced toes, military boots, or close enough. The second thing Reagan noticed was the man in seat 14C. Business class. He'd boarded early, taken his seat, and hadn't moved since. Hadn't eaten the meal, hadn't watched a movie, hadn't gotten up to use the restroom. He just sat there, eyes closed, hands folded in his lap. But his breathing was wrong. A sleeping person breathed slowly, deeply, their chest rising and falling in long rhythms. This man breathed like someone waiting. Quick inhales, controlled exhales, the breathing of a person who was very much awake and didn't want anyone to know it. The third thing was the passenger in 32D. Big man, broad shoulders, sitting on the aisle about 4 rows behind her. He'd smiled at her once during boarding, a friendly smile that didn't reach his eyes. Since then, he'd been reading a newspaper, the same page for 3 hours. Reagan turned back to her window, watching the reflection of the cabin in the darkened glass. She wasn't afraid. Fear was something she'd learned to process, to use, to transform into focus and action. What she felt now was closer to curiosity. "What are you waiting for?" The answer came 20 minutes later. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, calm and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've been asked to make a brief announcement. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. Flight crew, please report to your stations." The words were normal enough. The tone wasn't. There was something underneath it, a tightness that passengers who flew regularly might recognize. Reagan recognized it immediately. That was the voice of a man with a gun to his head. The blonde flight attendant appeared at the front of the economy cabin, pulling the curtain closed behind her. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her hand reached into the pocket of her uniform and came out holding something black and angular. A Glock 19. "Everyone stay calm," she said, her voice carrying easily through the cabin. The accent was different now. Not the neutral American English she'd been using. Something Eastern European, Russian definitely. "Keep your hands where I can see them. No sudden movements, no heroics." Someone screamed. A child started crying. The chaos of fear rippled through the cabin as passengers jerked awake, confusion and terror spreading like wildfire. Reagan didn't move. She watched. The man from 14C was on his feet now, another Glock in his hand, moving toward the front of the business cabin. The big man from 32D had produced his own weapon and was walking up the aisle, his friendly smile replaced by cold efficiency. 3 more figures emerged from various points in the aircraft. A dark-haired man from first class moving with the fluid grace of someone who'd done this before. Another from the crew rest area behind the cockpit. A third from the back galley. 6 total. They moved with precision, each taking up a position that covered different sections of the cabin, their movements coordinated in a way that spoke of extensive training and planning. This wasn't improvised. This was military. The man from first class walked to the center of the business cabin and picked up the intercom handset. He was older than the others, maybe early 60s, with steel gray hair cut short and a long score running down his left cheek. He carried himself like a man who'd spent a lifetime giving orders and having them obeyed. "Attention passengers." His voice was calm, almost pleasant, with the careful enunciation of someone speaking a language that wasn't quite native. "My name is not important. What is important is that you understand your situation. This aircraft is now under our control. The pilots will follow our instructions. The crew will follow our instructions. And you will follow our instructions." He paused, letting the words sink in. "We are not terrorists. We are not ideologues. We are professionals with a specific objective. Cooperate, and the vast majority of you will land safely at our destination. Resist, and people will die. The choice, as they say, is yours." Reagan watched him speak, analyzing every detail. The way he stood, weight-balanced, ready to move in any direction. The way his eyes constantly scanned the cabin even while he spoke. the way his hand rested near his weapon but didn't grip it, confident but not paranoid. This was a man who'd done violence before, a lot of it, and he was very, very good at it. Spetsnaz, she thought, or something close to it. GRU Special Forces, maybe 20, 30 years of experience. The others are his team-trained professionals, not fanatics. That was both good news and bad news. Good news because professionals were predictable. They had objectives, timelines, plans. They wouldn't kill passengers for ideological satisfaction or to make a statement. Every death would be calculated, purposeful, designed to achieve a specific result. Bad news because professionals were competent. They wouldn't make stupid mistakes. They wouldn't get emotional or careless. And they would have planned for contingencies. What do you want, Reagan wondered. What's on this plane that's worth this much effort? The answer came almost immediately. We are looking for someone, the leader continued. A woman named Elena Kovalenko. Dr. Elena Kovalenko. She knows who she is. She knows why we're here. He smiled, and it was the smile of a wolf spotting prey. Dr. Kovalenko, you have two choices. You can identify yourself now, come with us willingly, and spare everyone on this aircraft any unpleasantness. Or you can hide, and we will begin executing passengers until you change your mind. 1 every 10 minutes, starting with the children. The cabin went silent except for the muffled sound of sobbing. Everyone aboard held their breath, waiting. Reagan's eyes moved to the business cabin where a woman in her early 50s had gone very still. Gray hair pulled back, severely angular face, the posture of someone who'd spent decades in laboratories and lecture halls. She was looking straight ahead, not at the hijacker, not at anyone. She was thinking, calculating odds, weighing options, coming to a conclusion. The woman stood up. I am Elena Kovalenko, she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. Russian accent, but softer than the hijackers, more refined. Leave these people alone. I'll come with you. The leader's smile widened. How sensible. How very Russian of you, Doctor. Come forward, please, slowly. Dr. Kovalenko walked up the aisle, past rows of terrified passengers, past Reagan's seat. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. In that brief contact, Reagan saw something unexpected. Not fear, not resignation, determination. She's not giving up. Reagan realized. She's buying time. The question was, time for what? The next hour passed in tense silence. The hijackers had established their control with brutal efficiency. Passengers were zip-tied to their seats, military-grade restraints. Reagan noted the kind used for prisoner transport. Cell phones were collected, tossed into garbage bags, and carried to the front of the plane. Window shades were ordered closed. Dr. Kovalenko had been taken to first class and seated next to the leader, who spent long minutes speaking quietly with her. His words too soft to carry over the engine noise. Reagan sat very still in her seat, wrists bound to the armrests, watching everything. She'd counted the hijackers again. 6 confirmed, including the blonde woman and the leader. Positions: leader in first class with Kovalenko, 1 guard at the cockpit door, 1 in business class, 2 in economy. 1 roaming between sections on a regular patrol. The patrol followed a predictable pattern, 8 minutes per cycle, alternating between the port and starboard aisles. Predictable, Reagan thought. That's a mistake. She'd also identified what she believed was the Federal Air Marshal on the flight. Seat 18D, business class. Middle-aged man, athletic build, wearing a sport coat that could conceal a holster. He'd been one of the first to be zip-tied, and he'd taken it passively, not fighting or protesting. But he'd been watching the hijackers with the eyes of a professional, cataloging, analyzing, waiting. They'd hit him with a stun gun about 20 minutes ago. When he'd shifted slightly in his seat, 2 of the hijackers had dragged his unconscious body toward the back of the plane. She hadn't seen him since. Dead, Reagan wondered, or just neutralized. The roaming guard, the big man from 32D, had passed her seat 3 times now. Each time his eyes lingered on her a little longer than on the other passengers. On his 4th pass, he stopped. "You," he said. His voice was deep, his accent clearly Russian. "Stand up." Reagan looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. Not difficult to fake. She'd learned young that looking scared made people underestimate you. I'm tied down." He produced a knife, cut the zip ties on her wrists, and hauled her to her feet by the arm. His grip was strong fingers digging into her bicep hard enough to bruise. "Walk. To the front." He pushed her ahead of him up the aisle past rows of pale, terrified faces. An older woman reached out as she passed, a gesture of solidarity or comfort. But the guard slapped her hand away. "Eyes forward, no talking." The leader was waiting in the business cabin, standing in the aisle with his arms crossed. Up close, Reagan could see the details she'd missed from a distance. The scar on his face was old, decades old, the kind made by shrapnel or broken glass. His eyes were gray and cold, the eyes of a man who'd long since stopped seeing other humans as people. "This one," the guard said, pushing Reagan forward. "She's been watching, counting. I've seen her eyes." The leader studied Reagan with interest. Not the predatory interest of a man looking at a young woman. Something worse. The analytical interest of a professional evaluating a potential threat. "What is your name?" Reagan made her voice shake slightly. "Reagan. Reagan Mercer." "And what do you do, Reagan Mercer?" I'm a yoga instructor. I was visiting friends in Germany. I'm just trying to get home." The leader's eyes moved to her hands. Reagan felt her heart rate increase slightly, though she kept her breathing steady. He reached out and took her right hand, turning it over to examine her palm. "Yoga instructor," he repeated softly, "with calluses on your trigger finger and a pilot's grip on your palm." "Damn. My father," Reagan said quickly. "He was a hunter, took me shooting when I was a kid. I haven't touched a gun in years." The leader smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I think you're lying, yoga instructor. I think you're something else entirely." He gestured to the guard. "Search her." The blonde woman appeared from somewhere behind them, running her hands over Reagan's body with professional efficiency. She found nothing. Reagan had known she'd be searched at some point and had carried nothing that could identify her. Her military ID was in checked luggage. Her concealed carry permit was at home in Georgia. "Nothing," the blonde reported. "She's clean." The leader nodded slowly. "Perhaps, perhaps not. Either way, I think we'll keep you close. Tie her to that seat." He pointed to an empty seat in business class 3 rows behind Dr. Kovalenko. "And use the reinforced restraints. Our yoga instructor seems like the flexible type." The guard pushed Reagan into the seat, and the blonde zip-tied her wrists and ankles with practiced speed. The restraints were tight, cutting into her skin, but Reagan didn't react. She sat very still, letting her body go passive while her mind raced. The leader leaned down, his face close to hers. His breath smelled of cigarettes and coffee. "I don't know what you are," he said quietly. "Military, perhaps. Intelligence. It doesn't matter. You're restrained now, little yoga instructor. Sit still, behave yourself, and maybe you'll live to teach another downward dog." He straightened up and walked away, rejoining Kovalenko in first class. Reagan sat in her new seat, hands bound, ankles bound, surrounded by armed professionals who'd already demonstrated their willingness to use violence. She should have been afraid. Instead, she was running calculations. 6 hostiles, 2 confirmed in first class, 1 at the cockpit, 1 in business, 2 in economy, 8-minute patrol cycle. The restraints are military grade, but they're single-loop zip ties, not double-locked. I can break them, but I'll need a distraction. She looked around the business cabin, scanning the other passengers. Most were executives, business people, the kind of people who paid extra for wider seats and better wine. They sat in stunned silence, some crying quietly, others staring at nothing with the hollow-eyed look of shock. Her eyes stopped on a man 3 rows ahead and across the aisle. He was older, late 60s, with silver hair cut in a style that was unmistakably military. Even seated, even bound, he held himself with the straight-backed posture of a career soldier. And he was watching her, not with fear, not with confusion, with recognition. The man's eyes moved from her face to her right hand, where the silver ring caught the dim cabin light. His expression changed slightly, a tightening around the eyes that might have been surprise. Reagan felt her breath catch. He knows. The man looked away, but not before she caught the almost imperceptible nod, one professional acknowledging another. "Who are you?" she wondered. "And how do you know who I am?" The hours stretched on. Reagan sat in her seat, appearing passive and broken, while inside her mind worked like a precision machine. She memorized patrol patterns. She noted which guards were attentive and which were getting tired. She studied the restraints, testing their limits with small movements that could be mistaken for nervous fidgeting. The zip ties were tight but not impossible. Single-loop design, the kind that could be broken if you knew the technique. Raise your hands high. Bring them down hard against your hips. Let the impact stress the locking mechanism. She'd done it in SEER training. She could do it here, but not yet, not until the moment was right. Around hour 7 of the flight, something changed. The leader, she still didn't know his name, walked to the center of business class and picked up the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, an update on our situation. We are approximately 1 hour from our original destination. However, we will not be landing in Washington. We have alternative arrangements." He paused, and Reagan saw something in his expression that made her stomach tighten. He was smiling, not the cold professional smile he'd worn before, something else. Satisfaction. "For those of you wondering why we've gone to such lengths for one scientist, allow me to explain. Dr. Kovalenko is carrying information. Very valuable information about certain defense programs. Information that powerful people want to remain secret. Our employers were hired to ensure it does." He glanced toward Kovalenko, who sat rigidly in her seat, face pale. "Originally, we planned to deliver the doctor and her information to our employers. Simple, clean, professional. But circumstances have changed. Our employers have decided that the information poses too great a risk, that it must be destroyed completely, along with anyone who might have seen it." The cabin went very still. "In approximately 50 minutes, this aircraft will experience a catastrophic mechanical failure over the Atlantic Ocean. A terrible tragedy, no survivors. The investigation will conclude it was a freak accident, a malfunction in the fuel system perhaps, and the world will move on." Someone started screaming. Others joined in, the sound rising like a wave of pure terror. The guards moved through the cabin, shouting for silence, but the passengers were beyond hearing. Reagan felt the cold clarity of combat settle over her mind. 50 minutes. They're going to kill everyone. All of us. She looked at the old soldier across the aisle. He was looking back at her, his face calm despite the chaos around them. He raised one hand, slightly bound though it was, and made a small gesture. "Wait." Reagan understood. He had a plan, or part of one. She gave an almost imperceptible nod. Then she turned her attention to the real problem. Somewhere on this plane there was a bomb. The hijackers weren't going to shoot everyone one by one. They were going to blow the aircraft out of the sky and let the Atlantic Ocean hide the evidence. Find the bomb, disable it, then deal with the shooters. It sounded simple when she put it that way. Of course, nothing about this was simple. Reagan closed her eyes, letting the screaming passengers fade into background noise. She thought about her father, about the last time she'd seen him, about the words he'd spoken before boarding the C-130 that would take him to his final mission. "Fear is just information," he'd said. "Your body telling you to pay attention. Don't fight it. Use it. Let it make you sharper, faster, better. The pilot who wins isn't the one without fear. It's the one who turns fear into fuel." She opened her eyes. 48 minutes until everyone on this plane died. Unless she stopped it. Reagan Mercer looked at the restraints binding her wrists, at the guards patrolling the aisles, at the leader who thought he had everything under control. "You made a mistake," she thought. "You looked at me and saw a yoga instructor. A scared girl. A victim." She began slowly, carefully working on the zip ties, using the technique she'd learned in a classroom at Fort Bragg, practiced in the deserts of Afghanistan, perfected over 4 years of combat operations. You put the wolf in the sheep pen. The first restraint gave way with a soft click, hidden by the noise of passengers crying. And now you're going to find out what happens when the wolf decides to hunt. She kept her hands in position, hiding the broken restraint, waiting for the right moment. Captain Reagan. Hogg Mercer, the pilot that SEAL Team 5 called their guardian angel, the woman who'd flown 247 combat missions and never lost a single operator under her watch, was done being restrained. The hunt was about to begin. The old soldier moved first. Reagan watched him through half-closed eyes as he raised his bound hands and pressed them against his chest, his face contorted, breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The performance was convincing enough that even she might have believed it if she hadn't seen the calm calculation in his eyes moments before. "Help!" he wheezed. "My heart. Please, I need my medication." The guard in business class turned toward him, annoyed. "Sit down. Be quiet. I'm having a heart attack." The old man's voice cracked with apparent pain. "Nitroglycerin in my carry-on. Please, I'll die without it." 2 of the other guards moved closer, drawn by the commotion. The blonde woman appeared from the front cabin, her hand resting on her weapon. "What's happening?" "Old man says he's dying," the first guard reported. "Then let him die. We don't have time for—" The old soldier collapsed forward, his body crumpling into the aisle with a heavy thud. His breathing became labored, theatrical gasps that echoed through the cabin. For a moment, everyone's attention was on him. Reagan moved. She brought her hands down against her hips in one sharp motion. The second zip tie snapped with a soft click, lost in the noise of passengers murmuring and guards shouting. She kept her hands in position, wrists together as if still bound. The blonde woman was kneeling beside the old soldier, now checking his pulse. "He's alive. Pulse is irregular. Could be real. Or could be an act," the first guard said. "Check his bag. If there's medication, give it to him. If not, tie him down and let fate decide." While they searched for the medication, Reagan worked on her ankle restraints. These were tighter, less room to maneuver. She twisted her feet slowly, creating slack in the plastic, feeling the edges bite into her skin. The old soldier was still gasping on the floor, but his eyes found hers for a fraction of a second. In that moment, something passed between them. Recognition, understanding, trust. Then his hand moved almost imperceptibly, and something small and dark slid across the carpet toward her seat. A knife. Ceramic blade, invisible to metal detectors, hidden in what looked like an ordinary belt buckle. Reagan's foot stopped it before it could travel too far. She bent forward as if in distress, hiding the motion as she retrieved the blade and palmed it against her wrist. "Found it," someone announced. "Nitroglycerin tablets." The blonde woman fed one to the old soldier, who made a show of swallowing it and gradually recovering. They helped him back to his seat, zip-tied his wrists again, and returned to their positions. None of them noticed that Reagan's restraints were no longer intact. She sat perfectly still, the ceramic knife pressed flat against her palm, and waited. The patrol cycle would bring the guard past her seat in approximately 3 minutes. He would walk up the starboard aisle, check the passengers, then circle back through the port side. 8 minutes total. She would have to move during the transition. Reagan closed her eyes and breathed. She thought about the A-10 Thunderbolt II, the aircraft she'd flown for the past 4 years. Ugly and slow compared to sleek fighters like the F-22 or F-35. The other pilots called it the Warthog, a name that had become a term of endearment among those who flew it. But what the A-10 lacked in speed and grace, it made up for in raw, devastating firepower. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon mounted in its nose could fire nearly 4,000 rounds per minute, each shell the size of a beer bottle. When Reagan pulled that trigger, the sound was like nothing else in modern warfare. A deep, thunderous roar that enemy soldiers called the sound of God clearing his throat. She'd heard that sound 247 times in combat, had watched through her targeting camera as vehicles exploded, as enemy positions disappeared in clouds of dust and fire. Had listened to the voices of special operations soldiers on the radio, their relief palpable as she swept away the threats that had pinned them down. "Hog, this is Viking 6. You just saved our lives. We owe you a beer." "Hog Viking 6, outstanding work, every round on target." "Hog Viking 6, you're our angel. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." SEAL Team 5 had started calling her that after her 3rd mission supporting them. The Angel of Death, the Warthog who walked among men, their personal guardian in the sky. When they'd given her the unofficial title of number 1 A-10 pilot of the SEALs, she'd laughed and told them she was Air Force, not Navy. "Doesn't matter," the team leader had said. "You're ours now." She was still theirs, even here 38,000 feet above the Atlantic, bound and surrounded by enemies. Especially here. The guard's footsteps approached. Reagan kept her eyes closed, her breathing slow and even. He passed her seat without stopping. She counted to 60, then she opened her eyes and began to move. The restroom was 10 rows back. Reagan walked toward it with her head down, her posture submissive. Her wrists held together as if still bound. The nearest guard was facing away, dealing with a passenger who needed to use the bathroom. She slipped into the lavatory and locked the door. The space was tiny, barely large enough to turn around. Reagan braced herself against the sink and looked at her reflection in the mirror. Pale face, tight jaw, eyes that had seen too much and were ready to see more. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Then she waited. The knock came exactly when she expected it. 3 sharp raps on the door. "Time's up! Out! Now!" Reagan unlocked the door and stepped out directly into the guard's space. He was the one called Alexei, the nephew of the leader, young and overconfident. "Sorry," she said quietly. I wasn't feeling well." He grabbed her arm to lead her back to her seat. That was his mistake. Reagan pivoted, using his grip as leverage, and drove her elbow into his throat. The blow was precise, hitting the vagus nerve cluster with enough force to stun but not kill. His eyes went wide, mouth opening in a silent gasp. Before he could recover, she hooked her leg behind his knee and took him down. Her hand covered his mouth, muffling any sound, while her other arm wrapped around his neck in a rear choke. 8 seconds. That's how long it takes to render someone unconscious through blood choke. She counted each one, feeling his struggles weaken then cease. She dragged him into the lavatory, working quickly in the confined space. Zip ties from his own pocket secured his wrists and ankles. A strip of cloth torn from his shirt served as a gag. Reagan searched him methodically. Glock 19 with a full magazine, radio earpiece and microphone, cell phone with a 4-digit lock. She tried the code she'd memorized earlier, the one Alexei had used when she'd watched him check his messages. 1991. The phone unlocked. Reagan allowed herself a small smile. The year of Desert Storm, The year her father died, the year this whole thing apparently started. She tucked the phone into her pocket, secured the Glock in her waistband, and fitted the radio earpiece into her ear. Russian chatter filled her head. Status reports, position checks, the routine communication of a professional team executing a well-planned operation. Alexei status. Silence. Alexei, respond. Reagan keyed the microphone, keeping her voice low and rough. Bathroom situation. Passenger got sick. Cleaning up. A pause. Then, acknowledged. Return to position when complete. She had maybe 5 minutes before they got suspicious. Time to move. Reagan slipped out of the lavatory and headed toward the rear galley. According to the aircraft's layout, there should be an access hatch there leading to the cargo hold below. The cargo hold, where they would have hidden the bomb. She was halfway there when she heard it. A soft tapping sound, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from behind a storage compartment. Tap, 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 tap. Morse code, SOS. Reagan pressed her ear against the panel. The tapping continued, weak but persistent. Someone was alive in there. She found the release mechanism and pulled. The panel swung open, revealing a cramped space filled with emergency equipment and blankets. And Federal Air Marshal Marcus Webb, bound and gagged, blinking up at her with a mixture of surprise and relief. "Don't make a sound," Reagan whispered, pulling the gag from his mouth and cutting his restraints with the ceramic knife. Webb rubbed his wrists, wincing. "Who the hell are you?" "Captain Reagan Mercer, 75th Fighter Squadron, A-10 pilot. Air Force." His confusion was evident. "What's a pilot doing?" "I work with SEAL teams, joint operations, long story." She helped him to his feet. "Can you move?" "Took a stun gun to the chest, hurts like hell, but I'll manage." He paused, studying her. "The SEALs have an A-10 pilot. They call me Hog. Right now, that's all you need to know." Reagan handed him Alexei's Glock. "You know how to use this." Webb's expression shifted, becoming harder, more professional. 12 years Delta Force before I joined the Marshal Service. I know my way around." "Good. There's a bomb on this plane, cargo hold. I need to find and disable it while you coordinate with the other asset." "Other asset?" "There's an old soldier in business class, silver hair, military bearing. He helped me get free. I think he's former special operations." "I saw him. Thought he looked familiar." "Get to him. Together you can take the guards while I handle the bomb. Wait for my signal." Webb nodded slowly. "And if you can't disable it," Reagan met his eyes, "then none of this matters anyway." She didn't wait for a response. There wasn't time. The access hatch to the cargo hold was exactly where she expected it, concealed beneath a floor panel in the rear galley. Reagan lifted it carefully, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. Cold air rushed up from below. The cargo hold was unpressurized, kept at near freezing temperatures to preserve whatever was being transported. Reagan pulled her hoodie tighter and climbed down. The hold was vast and dark, filled with rows of cargo containers and luggage. Emergency lighting cast everything in dim red, creating shadows that seemed to move and shift. Reagan drew the Glock and began her search. She moved between the containers, checking each one, listening for anything that might indicate electronic components. A bomb this size would need a timer, a detonator, possibly a remote trigger. All of those would produce some kind of electrical signature. 5 minutes passed, then 10. A sound behind her, soft, almost imperceptible. Reagan spun, Glock raised. A man emerged from behind a cargo container. Middle-aged, maybe late 40s, with the lean build of someone who'd spent years in a cockpit. He was holding a knife, not a gun, and his stance told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't one of the passengers. "Impressive," the man said, his accent Russian but softer than Victor's. "Educated. I've been watching you since Frankfurt. The way you moved, the way you watched. I knew you weren't a yoga instructor." "Who are you?" Gregor Lenkov, formerly of the Russian Air Force, MiG-29 pilot, 15 years. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Now I work for whoever pays the most. Victor pays very well. Reagan kept her weapon trained on him. You were on the plane, pretending to be a passenger. Someone had to watch from the inside, make sure no one tried to be a hero. He tilted his head. You should have stayed in your seat, Captain Mercer. Yes, I know who you are now. I heard you tell the Air Marshal. Victor will be very interested to learn that Douglas Mercer's daughter is aboard. Victor's going to be too busy to care. Lenkov moved faster than she expected. The knife slashed toward her throat and Reagan barely twisted away in time. The blade caught her hoodie, slicing through fabric but missing skin. They fought in the cramped space between cargo containers, no room to use the gun effectively. Lenkov was skilled, his movements precise, trained for close combat in confined spaces. He'd been a pilot, but someone had taught him to fight like a soldier. But Reagan had spent 4 years working with SEALs. She knew how to fight dirty. She blocked his knife hand, drove her palm into his nose, felt cartilage crunch. Blood sprayed across his face. He staggered back and she pressed her advantage, an elbow to the temple, a knee to the groin, a final strike to the back of his neck as he doubled over. Lenkov collapsed and didn't get up. Reagan stood over him, breathing hard. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear, from adrenaline, from the knowledge that she'd almost died in a cargo hold 35,000 feet above the ocean. She zip-tied his wrists and ankles, gagged him with a strip of his own shirt, and left him among the luggage. One more obstacle cleared. Now where was that bomb? The radio in her ear crackled. Alexei, status report, you've been gone too long. Silence. Alexei, respond immediately. Then the leader's voice, cold and commanding. All units, we may have a problem. Find Alexei. Search every compartment. Reagan's time had just run out. She moved faster now, abandoning stealth for speed. The bomb had to be here somewhere. Had to be. Then she found it. Tucked behind a large cargo container wrapped in black plastic to avoid casual detection. 20 kilograms of C4 explosive, enough to blow a hole in the aircraft's fuselage and send everyone aboard plunging into the Atlantic. The timer showed 19:47 and counting down. Reagan knelt beside the device, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She'd had basic EOD training at Fort Bragg, enough to recognize common explosive configurations. This was old Soviet design, the kind used during the Cold War. Her grandfather had talked about bombs like this back when he was flying missions over Eastern Europe. The Russians always have a backup, he'd told her once. Always. Find it before you start cutting or you'll be picking yourself up from the ceiling. She examined the device carefully. 3 wires ran from the timer to the detonator. Red, blue, yellow. Standard configuration for a KGB-7 trigger mechanism. But there had to be more. Reagan traced the wires with her fingers, following them through the plastic housing, looking for anything unusual. There. A 4th wire, white, hidden beneath the main cluster. The backup trigger her grandfather had warned her about. If she cut any of the primary wires without disabling the backup first, the bomb would detonate immediately. She took a deep breath. Okay, Dad, she whispered. Okay, Grandpa, help me out here. She cut the white wire first. Nothing happened. Then she cut the yellow wire. The timer stopped at 17:33. Reagan sat back on her heels, letting out a breath she hadn't realized that she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up with her, but she wasn't done, not even close. She keyed the radio, switching to the emergency frequency that would reach military channels. JSOC Command, this is Captain Reagan Mercer, 75th Fighter Squadron, authentication code Delta 7 Tango 9er. Do you copy? Then Captain Mercer, this is JSOC Command. We copy. What is your situation? I'm on Lufthansa Flight 418 Frankfurt to Washington. Aircraft has been hijacked by 6 armed hostiles Russian origin. I've neutralized the explosive device they planted in the cargo hold and taken down 1 additional hostile, requesting immediate support and guidance. A pause. Then a familiar voice came on the line. Hogg, this is Admiral Morrison. We've been tracking this situation since the aircraft went dark. What's your status? Reagan felt a surge of relief at the sound of her commanding officer's voice. Admiral, I've taken out 2 hostiles and disabled the bomb. 5 shooters remaining in the cabin, plus approximately 280 passengers and crew. I have support from the Federal Air Marshal and a civilian who appears to be former Special Operations. Copy that. What do you need? Intel on the hostile leader. He's Russian, early 60s, scar on his left cheek, definitely former military. His people call him Victor. Another pause. We're running facial recognition now. Stand by. Reagan used the time to climb back up to the main cabin level. She emerged in the rear galley, checking both directions before stepping out. The radio crackled. Hogg, we have a match. Viktor Volkov, age 63, former colonel in the GRU, Spetsnaz before that. He was a military advisor in Iraq during Desert Storm, commanded air defense systems for the Republican Guard. Reagan's blood ran cold. Desert Storm, she repeated. Was he in Kuwait? Affirmative. His unit was responsible for shooting down 3 American aircraft before being destroyed by... The Admiral paused. Hogg, his unit was destroyed by a single F-4 Phantom pilot, Colonel Douglas Mercer, your father. The world seemed to narrow to a single point. Viktor Volkov, the man who had shot down American planes, the man whose air defenses her father had destroyed before being shot down himself. They weren't just enemies by circumstance, they were enemies by blood. Hogg, did you copy her? I copy her. Reagan said, her voice flat. I copy everything. She ended the transmission and stood in the darkness of the galley, processing what she'd just learned. Viktor Volkov had spent 33 years nursing a grudge against her father, against her family, and now by pure chance he had her father's daughter at his mercy. Except he didn't know it yet. He thought she was a yoga instructor, a scared civilian, a victim. Reagan smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. Let's see how he handles the truth, she murmured. She checked the Glock one more time, chambered around, and headed back toward the passenger cabin. Time to finish this. The first guard she encountered was Ivan, positioned at the rear of business class. He was facing forward, watching the passengers, his attention focused on the wrong direction. Reagan approached from behind, silent as a ghost. 4 years of working with SEALs had taught her how to move without sound, how to control her breathing, how to become invisible in plain sight. She was 3 feet away when he sensed something and started to turn. Too late. Her arm wrapped around his neck, cutting off blood to his brain. He struggled, hands clawing at her arm, but she held firm. 7 seconds. 8. 9. He went limp. Reagan lowered him to the floor and secured him with his own zip ties. 3 down, 4 to go. The radio in her ear erupted with urgent Russian. Ivan status! Ivan respond! Then Victor's voice, calm but with an edge of steel. We have an intruder. All units converge on the main cabin. Find them. Reagan pressed herself against the wall as footsteps approached from multiple directions. She was exposed here, caught between business class and economy, with hostiles coming from both ends. But she wasn't alone. The old soldier from business class appeared in her peripheral vision. He'd freed himself somehow and was moving toward the guard at the cockpit door. Behind him, Reagan saw Webb emerging from the galley area, Glock raised. 3 against 4. Better odds than before. The next 30 seconds were controlled chaos. Reagan engaged the guard coming from economy, a man she recognized as Yuri. He was fast, well-trained, but she was faster. They exchanged blows in the narrow aisle, passengers screaming and ducking as violence erupted around them. She blocked his punch, redirected his momentum, and slammed his head against an armrest. He staggered, and she followed up with a knee to the groin and an elbow to the temple. He went down hard. Behind her, she heard the sounds of Webb's struggle with another guard, a grunt of pain, the thud of a body hitting the floor. Then Webb's voice, clear. The old soldier had taken down the guard at the cockpit door with brutal efficiency. He stood over the unconscious body, barely breathing hard, looking like a man 30 years younger. 3 down in 30 seconds, 2 left plus Victor. Reagan moved toward first class, where Victor still held Dr. Kovalenko. The blonde woman, Katya, was with him. She was almost there when Victor's voice boomed through the cabin. "Stop!" Reagan froze. Victor stood in the doorway between first class and business, one arm wrapped around Kovalenko's neck, a pistol pressed to her temple. Beside him, Katya had her weapon trained on the passengers. "I don't know who you are," Victor said, his gray eyes fixed on Reagan, "but you've caused me considerable inconvenience." Reagan raised her hand slowly, the Glock still gripped in her right. "Let her go, it's over. Your bomb is disabled. Your men are down. You've got nowhere to go." Victor smiled, and it was the smile of a man who still held cards no one else had seen. "You think this is over, little girl? This is just beginning." He looked at her more closely, and something flickered in his expression. Recognition, uncertainty. "Those eyes," he murmured, "gray like winter ice. I've seen eyes like that before." Reagan said nothing. "Take off the hood," Victor commanded. "Let me see your face properly." She hesitated, then reached up and pushed the hoodie back from her head. Her auburn hair caught the cabin light, and Victor's expression changed. "Mercer," he breathed. "You're a Mercer." "Captain Reagan Mercer," she confirmed. "75th Fighter Squadron. And you're Victor Volkov, the man whose air defenses my father destroyed 33 years ago." Victor's face twisted with emotion, rage, disbelief, and something that might have been satisfaction. "His daughter," he said softly. "Douglas Mercer's daughter, delivered to me by fate itself. Do you know what he did to me, what he cost me? He did his job. He was a soldier. He was a murderer." Victor's voice cracked with decades of suppressed fury. 47 men under my command. Good men, Russian advisors, Iraqi soldiers, boys barely old enough to shave. Your father killed them all in one afternoon. And then he had the audacity to die before I could make him pay. Reagan's jaw tightened. He died saving American lives. 6 combat controllers would have been slaughtered without his support. He flew into your guns knowing he might not come back, and he did it anyway. That's not murder, that's sacrifice. Sacrifice. Victor laughed bitterly. Is that what they told you, the noble pilot dying for his country? Let me tell you what I saw that day. I saw a demon in the sky. I saw fire and death raining down on my men while they screamed and burned. I saw everything I'd built destroyed in minutes by one man in one plane. He pressed the gun harder against Kovalenko's temple. The scientist whimpered but didn't struggle. And now his daughter stands before me. The same gray eyes, the same arrogance, the same belief that American blood is worth more than anyone else's. Reagan kept her voice steady. This isn't about blood. This isn't about revenge. This is about innocent people who have nothing to do with what happened in 1991. Innocent. Victor shook his head. No one is innocent. Not you, not them, not the world that forgot what your father did. He smiled coldly. But you're right about one thing. This ends now. He shifted his aim from Kovalenko to Reagan. I'm going to kill you, he said conversationally. Then I'm going to kill everyone on this plane. And when they find the wreckage, they'll find your body among the rest. Douglas Mercer's legacy ended at 38,000 feet. Reagan looked into the eyes of the man who had spent 3 decades hating her father, hating everything he represented. "You're wrong," she said quietly. "About what?" "About this ending with my death." She moved. Reagan dropped to her knees as Victor fired. The bullet passed through the space where her head had been a fraction of a second earlier, shattering a window behind her. The cabin filled with the roar of escaping air oxygen masks dropping from overhead compartments as the pressure differential screamed through the breach. But Boeing engineers had designed the 707 to withstand exactly this kind of damage. The hole was small, the decompression manageable. Passengers screamed and grabbed for masks, but the aircraft held steady. Reagan used the chaos. She rolled sideways, coming up behind a row of seats as Victor fired again. The bullet tore through upholstery, missing her by inches. She could hear Katya shouting in Russian, trying to acquire a target through the pandemonium. The old soldier moved first. He tackled Katya from behind, driving her into the bulkhead with enough force to knock the weapon from her hand. They grappled on the floor, 2 professionals fighting with stunt deadly efficiency. Webb appeared from the port aisle, weapon raised, covering Reagan's advance. That left Victor. Reagan circled through the business cabin, keeping low, using the seats as cover. Victor had released Kovalenko and was moving to intercept her, his pistol sweeping back and forth as he searched for a target. "Come out, little Mercer!" he called, his voice carrying over the noise of the decompression alarm. "Come out and face me like your father never could." Reagan didn't respond. She was working her way toward him, closing the distance 1 row at a time. "He died running, you know," Victor continued. "When we finally hit his plane, he tried to eject, tried to save himself. But the ejection system failed, and he rode that burning coffin all the way to the ground. I watched it through binoculars, watched him fall." Reagan's jaw tightened, but she kept moving. She knew Victor was trying to provoke her, to make her angry enough to make mistakes. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. 33 years I've waited," Victor said. 33 years of dreaming about revenge, and now fate delivers his daughter to me, his only child, the last of the Mercer line. He was close now, 1 row away. Reagan could see his shadow on the ceiling, distorted by the emergency lighting. "Do you know what I'm going to do after I kill you?" Victor asked softly. "I'm going to find your family, anyone who shares your blood, and I'm going to end them all. The Mercer name will be erased from history." Reagan stood up. Victor spun toward her, pistol rising, but she was already inside his guard. She grabbed his gun hand with both of hers, twisting sharply. The weapon discharged into the ceiling as she forced his arm up and back. They struggled in the narrow aisle, 2 warriors locked in a battle that had been decades in the making. Victor was stronger than he looked, his muscles hardened by a lifetime of combat. He broke her grip and swung at her head with his free hand. Reagan ducked and drove her elbow into his solar plexus. He grunted but didn't go down. Instead, he grabbed her by the throat and slammed her against the bulkhead. Stars exploded in her vision. She felt his fingers tightening, cutting off her air. "Your father took everything from me," Victor hissed, his face inches from hers. "My career, my men, my pride, and now I take everything from him." Reagan couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. The edges of her vision were going dark, but she could still move. She brought her knee up hard between his legs. Victor's grip loosened for a fraction of a second, and that was all she needed. She broke free, gasping for air, and delivered a palm strike to his nose. Blood sprayed across his face. He staggered back, temporarily blinded. Reagan pressed her advantage. She kicked his knee, feeling something give way beneath the impact. Victor went down on 1 leg, still trying to bring his pistol to bear. She grabbed his gun hand again, this time with a different grip, a breaking grip. She twisted sharply, and Victor screamed as his wrist snapped. The pistol clattered to the floor. Reagan kicked it away and stood over him, breathing hard. My father didn't run, she said, her voice hoarse from the choking. He flew into your guns 3 times that day, 3 times. The first 2 to save those combat controllers, the third because he knew you'd shoot down more American planes if he didn't stop you. She crouched down, meeting Victor's pain-filled eyes. He wasn't running when he died, he was attacking. One last pass to make sure the job was done, that's what the mission reports say. That's what the men he saved told me at his funeral. Victor spat blood at her feet. Lies, American propaganda. No truth, something you've clearly forgotten how to recognize. She stood up and looked around the cabin. The old soldier had subdued Katya, who lay unconscious on the floor. Webb was securing the area, his face bruised but triumphant. It was over. Almost. Then the cockpit door opened. Reagan spun, pistol raised, expecting another threat. Instead, she saw a flight attendant, a real one, her face pale with terror. "Please," the woman said. "The pilots, they've been shot." Reagan's blood went cold. She pushed past the flight attendant and into the cockpit. What she found made her heart sink. The captain was slumped over the controls, blood soaking through his uniform shirt. A bullet wound in his shoulder, another in his side. He was alive but barely conscious, his hands still weakly gripping the yoke. The first officer was worse. He lay crumpled against the side console, unmoving. Blood pooled beneath him. "They shot us," the captain whispered. "When the shooting started in the cabin, they shot us and left." Reagan checked the first officer's pulse. Weak but present. He was alive, but he wouldn't be flying anything. "Can you land the plane?" she asked the captain. He tried to focus on her, but his eyes were glazed. "I can barely see, blood loss, need to. He passed out. Reagan stood alone in the cockpit of a Boeing 777, 35,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean, with 2 wounded pilots and no one else qualified to fly. No one except her. She slid into the captain's seat, careful not to disturb the unconscious man as she moved him aside. The controls were familiar and foreign at the same time. Familiar because all aircraft shared certain basic principles. Foreign because she'd spent her career flying a single-seat attack plane, not a commercial airliner. The A-10 Thunderbolt II had a wingspan of 57 feet and weighed about 50,000 pounds fully loaded. The Boeing 737-300ER had a wingspan of 212 feet and weighed over 700,000 pounds. This was going to be interesting. Reagan keyed the radio. "JSOC Command, this is Hogg. I have a situation." Admiral Morrison's voice came back immediately. "Go ahead, Hogg. Hostiles are neutralized, but both pilots are down, gunshot wounds, neither can fly. I'm in the cockpit." A long pause. "Hogg, please confirm you're saying you're the only person available to fly that aircraft." "That's correct, Admiral. I need to get this bird on the ground." "Captain Mercer, you're an A-10 pilot. You're not rated for commercial aircraft." "I'm aware of that, sir, but I'm what we've got." She studied the instrument panel, identifying systems she recognized and ones she didn't. "I need you to patch me through to someone who can talk me through this." A 777 pilot, a simulator instructor, anyone. "Stand by." While she waited, Reagan familiarized herself with the cockpit layout. The primary flight display showed their current position over the North Atlantic, about 2 hours from Washington. The autopilot was engaged, keeping them on course and altitude. As long as nothing went wrong, the plane would fly itself, but landing was another matter entirely. The radio crackled. "Captain Mercer, this is Captain William Hayes, United Airlines. I'm a 707 check airman with 30 years of experience. Admiral Morrison asked me to assist." "Captain Hayes, I appreciate the help. What do I need to know?" "First things first. Is the autopilot engaged?" "Affirmative." "Good. Leave it alone for now. The 777 is designed to fly itself under most conditions. Your job is to monitor systems and prepare for landing." A pause. What's your flying background? A-10 Thunderbolt 2, 247 combat missions. Hayes was quiet for a moment. Combat pilot, okay, that's actually good. You understand stick and rudder, you understand emergency procedures, you just need to scale everything up. That's what I figured. The 777 is going to feel slow compared to what you're used to. It's big and heavy, but it's also stable and forgiving. Don't over-control, small inputs, gentle corrections. Think of it like driving a truck instead of a sports car. Reagan nodded even though he couldn't see her. Copy that. Now where are you planning to land? She'd already been thinking about this. Washington was still 2 hours away and the weather there was uncertain. They'd passed the point of no return for turning back to Europe. The closest suitable airport was Keflavik, Iceland, she said. It's about 40 minutes ahead on our current course. Long runway, good facilities, and I'd rather not push my luck with a longer flight. Smart choice. I'm pulling up Keflavik's approach charts now. A pause. There's a weather system moving through. Winds are currently 45 knots gusting to 60 with rain and low visibility. Not ideal conditions. What are ideal conditions for a combat pilot landing a plane she's never flown before? Hayes actually laughed. Fair point. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'll talk you through the approach step by step. The 777 has excellent automated landing systems. If we can get you lined up on the localizer, the plane will do most of the work. And if the automated systems fail, then you'll land it manually. It's not that different from what you do every day, just bigger and slower. You've got this, Captain. I've heard stories about A-10 pilots. You people land on dirt roads in combat zones with half your aircraft shot off. A runway in Iceland should be a piece of cake. Reagan allowed herself a small smile. I'll hold you to that. For the next 30 minutes, Hayes walked her through the 707 systems. How to read the primary flight display, how to program the flight management computer for the approach, how to configure the aircraft for landing, lowering the flaps, and extending the landing gear. She absorbed the information with the same intensity she'd applied to learning the A-10, asking questions when things weren't clear, confirming her understanding before moving on. Hayes was a good teacher, patient and thorough, never condescending despite the unusual circumstances. Behind her, the old soldier appeared in the cockpit doorway. Everyone's secure in the cabin, he reported. Victor and his people are zip-tied and under guard. The passengers are terrified but alive. Good. I'm going to need you to help me here. You ever fly anything? Helicopters, long time ago. Not much help with something this size. You know how to read instruments. Enough to know if something's going wrong. Then you're my co-pilot. Sit there, watch those gauges, and tell me if anything starts flashing red. The old soldier settled into the first officer's seat, careful to avoid the injured pilot. They'd moved to the jump seat behind them. You really think you can land this thing? Reagan looked at the instrument panel, then out the windshield at the endless gray clouds. My father used to say that the pilot who wins isn't the one with the better plane. It's the one who thinks faster. She placed her hands on the yoke. I've been thinking fast my whole life. This is just one more problem to solve. At 40,000 feet, Reagan began her descent. Keflavik approach, this is Lufthansa 418 declaring emergency. Lufthansa 418 Keflavik approach. We've been expecting you. Say your situation. Both pilots incapacitated by gunshot wounds. I'm a military pilot attempting to land this aircraft, requesting priority handling and emergency services standing by. A pause. Lufthansa 418 understand both pilots incapacitated. Confirm you are the person flying the aircraft. Affirmative. Captain Reagan Mercer, United States Air Force. I have approximately 280 souls on board and limited experience with this aircraft type. I would appreciate any assistance you can provide. Lufthansa 418, roger. We're clearing all traffic. You have priority for runway 11. Winds are 200 at 45 knots, gusting 60. Visibility 1/2 mile in rain. We'll have emergency equipment standing by. Copy, Keflavik. Beginning approach. Reagan focused on the instruments as the 777 descended through the clouds. The aircraft bucked and shuddered in the turbulence, but she kept her hands light on the controls, remembering Hayes' advice about small inputs. The A-10 was a responsive, nimble aircraft that reacted instantly to pilot input. The 777 was like flying a building. Every movement took time to register, and overcorrecting led to oscillations that could quickly become dangerous. But Reagan was adaptable. That was what made her good at her job. She learned the 777's rhythms, anticipated its responses, and gradually developed a feel for how it wanted to fly. At 10,000 feet, she broke through the cloud base and got her first look at Iceland. Gray sky, gray ocean, a strip of black runway stretching into the distance, barely visible through the rain. Wind whipped across the approach path, pushing the aircraft sideways. JSOC, this is Hogg. I have the runway in sight. Beginning final approach. Copy, Hogg. You've got this. Reagan lined up on the localizer, letting the automated systems guide her toward the runway centerline. The 777's computers were doing most of the work, making constant small adjustments to keep them on course. But as they descended through 500 feet, a gust of wind caught the aircraft and pushed it hard to the left. Correcting, Reagan muttered, applying right rudder and aileron. The 777 responded slowly, too slowly, and she found herself drifting toward the edge of the runway. You're left of center line, Hayes said in her ear. Increase correction. She added more input, and the aircraft began to swing back. But now she'd overcorrected and they were drifting right. Easy, Hayes cautioned. Small movements, you've got time. Reagan took a breath and forced herself to relax. She was flying this like an A-10, making aggressive corrections that worked in a nimble attack aircraft, but overwhelmed the 777's slower responses. She needed to think ahead, anticipate where the aircraft would be, not react to where it was. The runway rose to meet them. 200 feet, 150, 100, another gust of wind, but this time Reagan was ready. She made a small preemptive correction and the 777 stayed on centerline, 50 feet. The ground effect cushion caught them and the aircraft floated. Don't flare too early, Hayes warned. Let it settle. Reagan held the nose attitude, waiting, feeling the aircraft sink toward the concrete. 30 feet, 20, 10. The main gear touched down with a firm thud. Reagan pulled the thrust reversers and applied the brakes. The 707 shuddered as it decelerated, the runway lights flashing past the cockpit windows. The aircraft slowed, 200 knots, 150, 100. Finally, they came to a stop halfway down the runway, rain streaming across the windshield. Reagan sat back in the seat, hands trembling on the controls. She'd done it. Keflavik Tower, Lufthansa 418 is on the ground. Lufthansa 418, welcome to Iceland. Emergency services are on the way. That was outstanding flying, Captain. Reagan keyed the radio one more time. Thanks for the runway. Then she closed her eyes and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for the past 8 hours. Behind her, she heard cheering from the cabin. Passengers who'd thought they were going to die, realizing they were going to live. The sound of relief, of joy, of survival. The old soldier in the co-pilot's seat was looking at her with something like wonder. That was the damnedest thing I've ever seen, he said. And I've seen a lot. Reagan opened her eyes and looked at him. We're not done yet. We need to get these pilots medical attention. They're already calling for ambulances. But first, He extended his hand. Master Sergeant Wade Brennan, retired, combat controller, 30 years. She shook his hand. Captain Reagan Mercer, 75th Fighter Squadron. I know who you are. Brennan's eyes were warm. I knew your father. He saved my life in Desert Storm, flew into the worst fire I've ever seen to pull my team out of a trap. Reagan felt something tighten in her chest. You were one of the 6. I was. Brennan's voice softened. I've carried that debt for 33 years. Always wondered if I'd get the chance to repay it. He smiled. I think today might count. Reagan thought about her father, about the stories she'd grown up hearing, about the legacy she'd spent her whole life trying to live up to. He would have been proud of you, Brennan said, as if reading her thoughts. What you did today, the way you handled yourself, that's Mercer through and through. For the first time since the hijacking began, Reagan felt tears sting her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft, lights flashing in the rain. Somewhere behind her, passengers were crying with relief, hugging each other, thanking God for their survival. Every soul aboard, all of them alive because a yoga instructor turned out to be something more. Reagan looked out the cockpit window at the gray Icelandic sky and thought about her father, about the man who had taught her to shoot, to fly, to never give up no matter the odds. I did it, Dad, she said softly. I flew it home. The rain fell and the lights flashed, and somewhere in the distance, Reagan Mercer could have sworn she heard the sound of an F-4 Phantom breaking the sound barrier. One last salute from a father to his daughter. One last acknowledgement of a legacy fulfilled. 2 weeks later, Reagan stood in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, wearing her dress blues for the first time in months. The ceremony had been brief but meaningful. General Morrison himself had pinned the Air Force Cross to her chest, followed by the Medal of Valor. The citation spoke of extraordinary heroism, of courage, under fire of actions above and beyond the call of duty. Reagan had listened to the words without really hearing them. Her mind was elsewhere, thinking about the passengers she'd saved, about the pilots who were recovering in a hospital in Reykjavik, about Viktor Volkov, who was now in federal custody awaiting trial, about her father. After the ceremony, she'd slipped away from the reception and driven to Arlington National Cemetery. Now she stood before a simple white headstone, one among thousands, her medals heavy on her chest. Colonel Douglas Wayne Mercer, 1955 to 1991. Husband, father, warrior, Mustang. Reagan knelt and placed something on the grave. Not flowers. A pair of pilot's wings, silver and worn, the ones her father had given her the day she'd earned her own. I've been carrying these for 15 years. She said quietly. You gave them to me when I graduated flight school. Said they were your good luck charm, the ones you wore on your first combat mission. She traced her fingers across the headstone, feeling the carved letters beneath her touch. I always wondered if I'd ever be worthy of them. If I'd ever do something that measured up to what you did. All those missions you flew, all those lives you saved. She sat back on her heels, looking at the grave. I think I finally understand what you meant when you said being a pilot wasn't about the plane. It's about the people you're protecting, the ones counting on you to get them home safe. A breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of spring flowers. 280 people got home safe because of what you taught me, because of the way you raised me. Because you showed me what it means to be a Mercer. She stood up, straightening her uniform. I'm going to keep flying, Dad. Keep protecting people. Keep living up to the name you gave me. She touched the headstone one last time. I love you, and I'll make you proud every single day. She turned and walked back toward the parking lot, her shoulders straight, her stride confident. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from JSOC Command. Captain Mercer, New mission briefing scheduled for 0800 tomorrow. SEAL Team 5 has specifically requested your support. Acknowledge. Reagan smiled and typed her response. Acknowledged. Hogg will be there. She put the phone away and looked up at the sky. Blue and clear with a few white clouds drifting lazily overhead. Perfect flying weather. Somewhere up there her father was watching. She was sure of it. "See you up there, Dad," she whispered. Then Captain Reagan, Hogg Mercer, the #1 A-10 pilot of the SEALs, walked toward her car and the next mission waiting for her. In the weeks that followed, the story of Lufthansa Flight 418 became international news. Hijacking foiled at 38,000 feet. Military pilot saves hundreds. The yoga instructor who took down terrorists. That last one made Reagan laugh. The truth about her active duty status and her connection to SEAL teams remained classified. It was better that way. Viktor Volkov was extradited to the United States. His trial would be long and complicated. Reagan didn't care. She'd said everything she needed to say. Dr. Elena Kovalenko delivered her information to the appropriate authorities. The intelligence she carried would reshape America's understanding of Russian weapons programs for years to come. She sent Reagan a handwritten note. "You saved more than my life," she wrote. "You saved something far more important I will never forget." Master Sergeant Wade Brennan returned to his quiet life in Montana, but not before sharing one last memory of her father. "He said you had the fire," Brennan told her. "The thing that separates the good pilots from the great ones, the thing that makes you fly into the guns when everyone else is flying away. He saw it in you when you were just a kid." 3 months later, Reagan was back in the sky over Syria answering another call from SEAL Team 5. "Hogg, this is Viking 6. We are danger close. Multiple enemy vehicles approaching from the east. Request immediate fire support." "Viking 6, Hogg, I have your position and enemy vehicles in sight. Confirm you are in cover." "Confirmed. Clear to engage." Reagan lined up her attack run, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline. "Hogg is in hot." She pulled the trigger and the GAU-8 roared its terrible song. Another mission. Another team brought home safe. As she climbed back to altitude, Reagan touched the silver ring on her right hand. A new one now, her own, earned through her own fire. "Hogg is always ready," she whispered, and somewhere above the clouds in a sky that stretched forever, she knew her father was smiling.